South Africa is making progress towards exiting the Financial Action Task Force greylist. According to the FATF, the country has addressed 20 of the 22 action items relating to combating money laundering and terrorist financing. We talked to Chartered Accountant and Independent Analyst Khaya Sithole for more. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time, Khaya. Khaya Sithole joining us on the line here. Khaya, what does making efforts towards exiting the Financial Action Task Force grey list actually mean for the country as we reflect on how we even got there to begin with?
So I think obviously the historical context is quite important, and how we got onto the grey list is that the Financial Action Task Force took the view that actually, based on the sum of the considerations that we obviously had to engage with them, they felt that South Africa was not really in a position at that particular point in time to be able to vouch particularly for the type of money flows that happens within its ecosystem. And when that is the case, when you are unable to really explain the architecture and justify and vouch for the architecture of your ecosystem, then you do get regarded as a risky counterparty. And when you are a risky counterparty as a country, that's when you get into the grey list. So what that does is that it triggers a process where they would give you a list of all the things that are of particular concern, and you as a country or as a nation are then supposed to address them. And then obviously South Africa undertook particular steps to try and address some of them. But obviously until you have addressed the sum of all the issues that are raised out there, you do remain on that particular list. And as we go through particular evaluations, follow-up evaluations, it's always a question of, well, we started off with this being the issues or the talking points or the points of departure. How many of them have you addressed and how many of them have you fixed? And until you've fixed the majority of them substantively, you do remain on the grey list. And what we've just received now is obviously an update on the fact that, yes, you've done some progress, you've made some progress in addressing some of these issues, but some of the more fundamental issues still remain unresolved. So therefore, you're still on the grey list as a country.
And South Africa has been under increased monitoring by the FATF because of these certain deficiencies in its anti-money laundering and so forth. What impact has that had on the country?
So the big impact is that obviously when you are a country that has been grey listed, and when you are a company from a country that has been grey listed, it means that there is an elevated level of scrutiny from your counterparties in relation to engaging with you. So if you're not on the grey list, it means that people are willing to work on the basis that, look, you come from a country or you operate in a country where some of these issues have already been resolved. So they do not need to ask you additional questions. They do not need to demand additional information regarding how your money flow patterns are and obviously the integrity of your financial systems. When you are on the grey list, it simply means that then there is then an expectation from your counterparties that they will actually demand more information in order for them to reach a sense of comfort or a level of comfort about the fact that they can engage with you as a counterparty. So what that does is that obviously when transactions could have taken a day or two, transactions may take a week or two because people are asking for additional information. So we refer to that as the additional compliance cost associated with being grey listed. And sometimes obviously additional compliance costs may mean that additional delays in executing deals, and in a competitive environment, it means that somebody else who doesn't have to deal with the grey listing implications, who doesn't have to deal with the grey listing delays, may be able to reach the end of a conclusion or the end of a transaction much faster than you. So that tends to be the issue that private corporates tend to face when they are associated with a grey listed country, in that unfortunately the burden on them to prove their probity and their integrity is a bit much higher. And sometimes it means that by the time they're able to execute and be able to prove their integrity and probity, somebody else from a non-grey listed country has been able to do that much faster than them. So therefore, they're able to execute on the deal to the detriment of a South African entity.
South Africa is the third G20 country to be placed on the list after Argentina and Turkey. And of course, we can see, as you and I speak, that South Africa hasn't stood still in trying to reach its objective of exiting the grey list. What do you think are some of the important lessons that can be learned from other countries on how to do this and how to not land up in the same position again?
Well, I think the simple issue is that we shouldn't have ended up here in the first place. And what that means is that our authorities should have been very vigilant and very alert about what some of the red flags are that ultimately lead to grey listings. So if you then look at the nature and the architecture of our financial ecosystem, you should be aware of the type of things that will actually, if they are not monitored or monitored vigilantly enough, they do create particular risks for money laundering and, those types of illicit financial flows. So this is something that we should have been monitoring on an ongoing basis long before. But unfortunately, what then turned out is that South Africa was not as vigilant as it needed to be in monitoring these, and also our law enforcement processes, which are the ones that are supposed to then trigger accountability when we do identify what some of these issues are. So it's not sufficient just to say that the Reserve Bank is able to identify that this is an illicit financial flow or this is a dodgy or suspicious transaction. It's also a question of once you've identified that these are dodgy and illicit transactions, how do you then enforce accountability? And what we have seen is that we have been failed, particularly by the law enforcement agencies, by the prosecution agencies, in that there's been a myriad of transactions that are very clearly problematic transactions. So those entities that are working in the financial space, whether it's the Reserve Bank, the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, or even the Prudential Authority, will say that this is a problematic transaction. And obviously, they can only do as much in order to be able to raise a red flag, and then the prosecution process is beyond their hands. So when you see that the prosecution process do not actually materialize, it then creates a gap where it then says, well, actually, everybody who has an interest or has a desire on facilitating illicit financial flows within that particular country, there is actually an opening. You can go and do it because the prosecution's agencies are not particularly up to speed. Prosecution's agencies are not very good at enforcing accountability. So therefore, even if the Reserve Bank picks up that you're doing something wrong, even if the Prudential Authority, or even if the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, or even the JSE picks up that you're doing something wrong, you're probably not going to get prosecuted because the prosecution's agencies are not really up to speed. So that's the gap that we've been dealing with. So what we saw is that when this obviously became an issue, those that are responsible for the financial part of the ecosystem, rather than the prosecution's part of the ecosystem, they went to Parliament and then they said the reason we got here is because of all of this. And then they obviously proposed a range of bills. We call it the omnibus bills, where they then said that we need to actually create these particular laws so that we can be able to cover our bases. But until you actually get the prosecutions to then deal with those that have fallen foul of that, the FATF is always going to take the position that all you've done is simply say it in spirit, but you actually haven't applied it in law. So until you apply it in law, we're not sure that you are the type of country that has dealt with the type of issues that we identified, and that's how we're still grey-listed.
How much damage do you think that this grey-listing process has done for South Africa's image, South Africa's credibility, especially at a time when South Africa is trying to attract investors?
It's a remarkably significant damage. And remember, South Africa has pre-existing problems in that we are junk rated according to this, which means that already we had a pre-existing problem in that whenever we try to engage with the international capital markets, whether we're trying to raise funding for running the state or whether we're obviously trying to do particular things, there's always an issue that, well, you're a country whose financial state is so precarious, you are regarded as junk status. So when you then add the whole junk status definition or the junk status profile to the idea of being grey listed, it simply means that incrementally, those that are responsible for going to champion our cause out there in the international capital markets, whether it's private enterprises or whether it's national treasury when it's raising our finance to run the country's affairs, they are the ones that occasionally have to be dealing with the question of, well, guys, please can you explain when you're going to get out of the grey list? Please can you explain when you're going to get out of junk status? So it actually means that when they come back and then they said we've been able to raise so much, whether in billions of dollars or billions of pounds or billions of euros in particular currency, that we need to be able to run our state of affairs, it has happened at an incrementally higher cost, which means that you and I as a taxpayer are actually paying the cost of us being in this particular dimension of not just being grey listed and also being in junk status. So it is something that is going to deal with us. It's going to something that's going to affect us for the long run, and it's something that we need to fix, which is why National Treasury has been working so hard on trying to get us out of the grey list. But unfortunately, according to the FATF, we just haven't done enough to be able to get ourselves out of that quandrum.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for weighing in on this discussion. Some analysis there from Chartered Accountant and Independent Analyst Khaya Sithole.